Movavi.
Welcome to the King's Court. I'm your host, King Roberto. Had something lined up for this episode, and it didn't happen. And honestly, that's part of the story. Because not everyone steps forward when you expect them to. Not everyone moves at your pace. And if you're the one leading, you've got a decision to make in that moment. Scrap the whole thing, start over, or find a different path forward. So that's what we're doing. We're going to find a different path forward. Now, our guest tonight for this podcast just didn't feel like the time was right for him to join us. And nothing went wrong. It just didn't go. And sometimes that happens. Just because you have a plan or I have a plan doesn't mean that it's automatically going to fall into place. And I'm sure there's lots of us who can relate to that feeling. The plan we thought we had gets derailed. Or the guest we thought we were going to have on the show decides not to come on. Whatever the reason, whatever it might be, there's no right or wrong to it. There's just the reality of it is what it is. And there's a little bit of a realization to that. You know, I had been talking about this guest for a while. Was excited to have him on. And I was prepared for it to happen. And I was looking forward to it to happen. But it didn't line up for him. And he wasn't necessarily prepared when I was. And so that moment, that realization that just because I'm moving, that the others need to move as well, that's an expectation that I have that's not necessarily always reality. And how do you combat that? I mean, I don't know that there's anything we could have done different. You know, this one had sent an email, said, can I be on the show with you? It'd be fun. Yeah, we'll get you on in season 2 here. And, you know, maybe it didn't happen soon enough. Maybe that's my bad. Should have done it earlier in the season. Or maybe he just got cold feet. That might be the case too. But the door's still open for it. And that's kind of the way that I operate in most things I do. Whether I'm at work, whether I'm at home, or whether I'm at camp. You know, I kind of get the task of being the problem solver. You know, we have a running joke at the office that, you know, you're not a project manager, you're a problem solver. And what is the problem to solve? I mean, we just had one recently where we have a client that we're working with, and they were having some contract trouble figuring out how to unlock the contract. So, you know, we were ready and pushing for the contract to get back to us, but we didn't realize on their end that they had some stuff going on, that they were locked out of the contract due to circumstances, and they need a little bit more time. And sometimes that's a matter of communication, right? And again, our guest not being here for this podcast, that could be my bad for not communicating more clearly with him. That this was going to be the podcast for him to join us on. And communication is one of those things that's always evolving. You know, the communication between friends, the communication between spouses, it's a big part of why we're successful or unsuccessful in a lot of things that we do. And to an extent, I have learned as I've got older that is such a large role in everything that I do. Good communication generally leads to good execution. You know, good directions, good definition of expectations and whatnot, that is probably the number one area that I fall short in. But it's also one of my stronger areas. It's the consistency in having that clear communication with whoever it is. Most of mine is with my wife or my kids, or at work with coworkers, colleagues, and other individuals. And I've seen that growth in the way that I communicate over the years has evolved, I guess you would say. Where I was, 20 years ago, the communication style was pretty immature. It was pretty appropriate for, somebody in their late 20s, early 30s, but, it was something that I had not honed yet. And I'm getting better, and I've still got work to do, but I think it is getting better. And people who work with me or communicate with me would probably argue that, I do a decent job of laying out the expectations, giving decently clear directions. I mean, I'm not perfect at all by any means, and more often than not, it doesn't go perfectly. But perfection is something that's, quite frankly, unattainable. The perfect communication of wishes and directions and what have you that leads to good execution is a lot of the time on me. But the other side of that is that sometimes people, they overthink things or overanalyze it. I mean, sometimes they're just not ready, and we sit here and say, oh, it's a silly little podcast, which is really just this terrible thing that people listen to because it's not a very good podcast. And I'm the first one to admit that. But, sometimes people just aren't ready to be listened to, or they're not ready to be watched on YouTube. And that's something that even I, when I started doing this, struggled with. Who wants to listen to me? Why would they want to listen to me? Who wants to watch me on YouTube? And why on earth would they want to do that? And it's not just, it's not something that I think is a weakness or anything. It's just different timing. The timing didn't line up. What feels normal to me might feel like pressure to someone else. And so all the ducks have to line up. All the cards have to fall into place for a guest to get on the show here. Now, I was fairly lucky to convince my wife to do it with me one time. And she reminds me frequently that is one of the highest ranked podcasts that I've done was with her. And she frequently volunteers to come back on to help me reach more people. She's definitely not hesitating, and she's definitely not overthinking it. Now, there was a moment that she would hesitate before that first one, and that she did overthink it a little bit. And it took some convincing to get her to sit down for 30 minutes and have a conversation with me. And that's really all we're doing on this podcast, right? We're just having conversations. But sometimes when you're not ready, I mean, I've been in those shoes, not ready, hesitated, overthink a situation. And a lot of times that is related back again to good communication and follow through. But, when I was younger and we were looking at properties to buy to build a house, there was several instances where I probably hesitated, or I overthought it, or overanalyzed the property, just questioning whether it was the right one or not. And then you'd watch that property get bought and developed, and the owner of that do exactly what you were planning to do, but you just didn't have the nerve to pull the trigger or get after it like they did. And they do what you wanted to do and that you thought was possible, but you didn't do it because you hesitated. And you see the results of that up front and personal. And that's sometimes it's a hard lesson to learn, because those opportunities, they don't always come back around. A thing like buying a property, buying a house, buying something that is unique and one of a kind doesn't always come back around. An opportunity to get on the podcast with me as a guest is something that doesn't always come back around. Now, in that particular instance with this fellow who's not with us tonight on this podcast, the door's open, and he is welcome to walk through it whenever he wants. And when he's ready, he'll let me know that he's ready, and we'll have a sit down and have a chat, and it'll still be fun. But that pressure for other people to perform or live up to expectations or live up to hype can sometimes be overwhelming. And I've seen it. People get paralyzed. They can't make a decision. And I had one recently came up to me and said, "What should I do? I have option A when I can do this." And this person laid out all of these expectations. And I have option B and I can do this, and laid out all of those expectations and asked me, "What should I do?" And I told them that I can't answer that for you. You know, because the truth about people is that everybody's their own individual. And what I think, I could answer it from my perspective, but I can't tell them what they should do. So I try to outline it in a manner that gives weight to their thoughts and helps them analyze the situation. I mean, we do a decision grid in this family for major decisions, and we write down the pros and the cons and score them and weight them, and then wherever you end up with the most points is the logical decision. Now, there's not to say that your gut instinct doesn't carry a lot of weight in that, because if it's a decision that's a big decision and you've kind of done the decision grid in the matrix and put everything together and it's really close, that gut instinct matters. And that might be something that I would say, trust your gut. But for me to answer a question for somebody else of what should I do, just doesn't really work out. Now, if you're asking me a question at work and it's what should I do, we're going to analyze that situation together, and we're going to come up with a strategy and a plan to move forward. The particular person that I was talking to recently, this wasn't work related. This was something about them in their life that they had to kind of sort through. And there was no right or wrong answer. It was just they were at a crossroads and kind of paralyzed for a little bit. And that happens from time to time. But the trick is to make that decision and keep moving forward, right? We talked about it on the last podcast. The ability to keep moving forward is something that is valuable to people. And just as much as good communication matters, so does the that ability to make that decision and move forward and have confidence in your decision. Even if it ends up being the wrong decision, you see it through to the end, because that's the decision that you made. But you're also flexible enough that you can change, or you can kind of bob and weave with the punches as they come at you. And that's part of the deal too. But yeah, I mean, when the guest said, "Yeah, I'm not going to make it, not really feeling it," that was one of the options there, is you can kind of drag them along with you, or you can kind of make an adjustment, a course adjustment. And then that's what we're doing tonight. You know, you don't drag people into your pace. You recognize who's already in motion. And that's kind of on me, you know. I got to do a better job of making sure that guests, when they're on the card to join the show, you know, I got to make sure that they're ready to get on the show and that they're in motion, that they're moving the right way, because otherwise, when you thought you had a guest, you don't have a guest. But the circle is definitely expanding, and it continues to expand, just not by force. In fact, just this last week, I had a friend of mine come over for dinner one night, and he was shocked to know that King Roberto had a podcast. And it's not like I keep this a secret. I've got an entire Instagram page devoted to King Roberto, and the podcast is mentioned frequently on it, but he was still a little behind the times. Now, admittedly, he had a large project for his work that took a lot of his time over the last 8 months or so. Turns out that he got that project done, and then they cut back on staffing, and he ended up getting laid off, which really sucks. But what are you going to do? Maybe one of these times I'll get him to come on the show with us. But yeah, we gained a new listener this last week, which is fun. I did warn him that this is a terrible podcast and that it's a waste of his time, but he insisted on listening, so good for him. We love it when we get new listeners, for sure. But, you know, that might be something that starts gaining a little bit of momentum. And there's a couple of listeners out there who I know who might join us on one of these shows. I got to run it by them and see if they're ready for it, because it is something that does take time. And there are expectations of showing up when you say you're going to show up. And there are definitely some lives that get affected when they don't show up. So, again, that good communication, that clear definition of expectations, that's on me to make sure that that gets framed properly when I talk to them. So, yeah, on the podcast here, we kind of keep building, keep moving, leave the door open for those who want to walk through, but I don't stand in it. I'm not going to be the one in the door saying, come on, let's go. Encouraging somebody to come on, that's kind of your decision. That's up to you to make that choice. And there's no frustration or disappointment, but it comes with a little bit of clarity that, this isn't necessarily for everyone. And while I enjoy the heck out of it, there's not saying that anybody else is going to enjoy the heck out of it quite as much as I do. So let's get into our royal decree here. And it kind of ties into what we're talking about tonight. Not everyone is ready when you are, and that doesn't mean you stop moving. The court's still here, and it's still growing. I am a little bit under the weather this week, so I appreciate you taking time to listen to the podcast tonight. It is a little bit shorter than normal, but we're going to wrap it up with that. And hey, if you want to join us on the podcast, you know how to get a hold of me. Send an email, send a DM on Instagram or X, and say, hey, King Roberto, love to join you on the show. You can do it remotely. We've got that figured out, how to do it. It was set up for tonight's, but we ended up changing gears and going in a different direction. And with that, I'm going to sign off from this one and maybe go have some warm tea with honey to feel a little bit better. And I will catch you next week on the next podcast. It's King Roberto saying goodbye.
Mauvavi. Mauvavi.